Today we're going to look at the Spanish-American War and the impact it played within the United States attempting to become a world power. Now the Spanish-American War is important because it kind of is the first opportunity for the United States to stand out on the world stage. Right? So we're going to look closely at a couple of different areas. The first one is Cuba. Okay, located in Latin America and located within the Caribbean. Right now, at this point, Spain used to be a worldwide empire, but has now since started to decline. Right, and now the United States was starting to see some opportunities. Right, and one of the opportunities was Cuba. All right, so the two areas we're going to look at are Cuba and the Philippines. All right, so if you're looking here at a map of the Caribbean Sea, Cuba being an island, right, just about 90 miles off the coast of Florida. All right, now the Cuban Revolution, being a colony of Spain, the Cubans are going to want their own independence, right? So they are going to begin their revolution in 1895, led by Jose Marti, right? But they're going to be put down by Spain, and then as a result, the rebels are going to be treated very badly by the Spanish, right, as a result of their failed attempt. And that's kind of not going to go unnoticed by the Americans. Now, a lot of Americans had an interest in Cuba from a financial perspective, right? A lot of trade going on, access to goods, right? And this revolution was really going to disrupt and force the Americans to pay attention, right? And the other big thing was the United States was generally concerned about how the Cubans were being treated. So this is where yellow journalism comes in. Right, you had two New York City newspapers, right, led by Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst here. They're going to try and get people interested and focused in an attempt to try and sell newspapers by exaggerating or using yellow journalism to make people aware of what was going on. All right, so the two newspapers there, the New York World and the New York Journal. Now, yellow journalism is simply, it's not exactly lying, but it's more exaggerating to try and catch somebody's attention. All right, so this sensational style of reporting was aimed at trying to get people focused or paying attention to what was going on in Cuba with the Cuban rebels being being mistreated. So yellow journalism, 20-year vocabulary words, right? It's kind of a biggie in this chapter because it's the use of the media to try and influence public perception. Right, so America goes to war, or not necessarily goes to war yet, but we're getting to that point, right? But it's more fueled by yellow journalism to try and get the U.S. government to intervene, to protect or to assist and help the Cubans. So the one step that the United States takes is to send a battleship, the USS Maine, to Havana, Cuba, right, January 1898. And that's there merely to just kind of protect American interests, American businesses that are there. But on February 15th, so just over a month after arriving, right, the Maine is going to explode and 266 American sailors are going to be killed. Now, nobody knows exactly what caused the explosion, but as you can imagine, newspapers are going to run wild with this story, right, to try and entice Americans to want to go to war with Spain. So here was some of the, here's obviously a newspaper photography, it's not an actual photograph, but newspaper headlines or newspaper covers showing all the different headlines about the Maine being exploded, and this one being the only primary source, right, or the only actual photograph of the Maine exploding itself. Right, now, obviously, thanks to the newspapers and yellow journalism, Americans are going to automatically just jump to the conclusion that Spain was responsible, right, and then they're going to want to go to war. So the slogan then becomes kind of like Remember the Alamo, it's now Remember the Maine, right? And now Americans want Cuban independence, they want the Spanish removed from the Caribbean, they don't want their troops in Cuba anymore, and the United States is now ready to go to war. Spain's response, obviously, is to break off diplomatic relations. The United States is now at war. Now, as I told you, the two locations where the fighting is going to be taking place is the island of Cuba, but it's also going to be the Spanish colony, the Philippines, out in the Pacific. Remember, we were talking about Hawaii being one of the targets. Now we have Hawaii. So the United States is slowly starting to expand out into the Pacific. So it seemed only natural that the Philippines would be one of the United States' targets. All right, so war begins in 1898. Now, the Spanish-American War is going to be referred to as the Splendid Little War, right, because it's kind of sandwiched in between the Civil War and World War I. Doesn't last very long, and the United States really doesn't have that much difficulty defeating the Spanish. All right, so the first battle is going to take place in the Philippines, which, as I said, was a Spanish colony in the Pacific Ocean. All right, so war in the Philippines, you can see here would be a map of the Pacific. The Philippine Islands are located over here. Remember, we started trading with Japan. We're going to be trading with China. Right here is Hawaii right there. So we got that shipping route. We got the access. Right, so Commodore George Perry is going to defeat the Spanish at Manila, being the first battle of the Spanish-American War. All right, so here's once again showing the United States coming in through China. It shows you the Philippine Islands here. So August 13th, 1898, the battle at Manila, won by the Americans. All right, now we turn our focus back to where it all began in the Caribbean. All right, with Cuba, the U.S. Army, thanks to yellow journalism, the amount of soldiers is going to swell tremendously. Lots of patriotism. Remember the Maine. Lots of people want to get involved and fight for the United States. Okay, even one individual who we've already talked about, but remember, all these chapters, even though they're chapters in our book, and then, this chapter, then that chapter, then that chapter, okay, it's all kind of going on at the same time. So Teddy Roosevelt, as we talked about in a previous screencast, okay, before he becomes president, he actually volunteers to fight in the Spanish-American War, and he does lead a military unit at the Battle of San Juan Hill. The Spanish fleet is going to be defeated by U.S. naval ships July 17, 1898, and that's really one of the last lines of protection that Spanish troops have in Cuba. And then another island in the area that the U.S. gains control is Puerto Rico as well. All right, so here would be a map of Cuba showing United States setting up the blockade. So Cuba's here, capital of Havana. That's where the Maine was sunk, right? And Puerto Rico was also a Spanish colony, which the United States is going to be able to take advantage of as well. Now, you have access to this map and the previous map of the Philippines in your textbook. Okay, it's also located on Class Zone if you want to look at it in a little bit more detail. All right, here would be just a couple images from the time. Here's Teddy Roosevelt. That picture was also in our notes previously, okay, leading his Rough Rider unit at the Battle of San Juan Hill. Right, the end of the war with the Treaty of Paris, right, August 12th, 1898. Like I said, it's not a very long war. That's why it's referred to as the Splendid Little War, because it does not occur for very long, and the United States does have a relatively easy time with the Spanish. Right. One of the things that the United States wants is it demands that Spain gives up all of its colonies, and the United States assumes control of some of their colonies. Okay, you can see Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Right. One of the mistakes maybe that the United States makes is by refusing to allow the Philippines to be their own independent country. Right. Instead, the United States kind of takes control and they become an American colony. Cuba, on the other hand, becomes an independent country, and Puerto Rico also becomes an independent country or independent territory at this time. All right. The Filipinos do rebel against the United States, even though it starts with an F. That's what you would call somebody from the Philippines. Right, they do rebel, but the U.S. government is going to put them down. Right, so once again, here's Guam here, Philippine Islands here, we get Cuba here, we get Puerto Rico. So you throw in Hawaii and Alaska, and you can slowly start to see the United States is accumulating more and more land, right, throughout the Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean. All right, now Cuba and Puerto Rico. Cuba, even though we kind of, as the imperialism having influence, Cuba is an independent country, but the United States does still maintain a military presence. And then the Platt Amendment is added to the Cuban Constitution, which gives the United States a reason to intervene if necessary in Cuba. The same thing with Puerto Rico. It's just the Foraker Act. Okay, that makes it a U.S. territory, but it still has its own government. All right, in 1917. Now, lots of people are going to not be in favor of the United States obtaining colonies. Okay, they form the Anti-Imperialist League, and their big argument is they feel it's not right for the United States to deny other people the right to govern themselves, especially since the United States starts off as a colony and we weren't happy with being a colony. And there can be some irony seen there that the United States is interested in becoming an imperial power when we weren't happy being a colony of another country.